At 9:02 on an October morning in 1992, a pale sun skimmed the soybean stubble and struck a hard flare off the metal thermos sitting on the dashboard of a blue Ford. The engine idled with a steady, low tremor. The driver's door hung open. Keys dangled and clicked against the column shifter whenever the breeze nudged them. From the Ford's single speaker, Conway Twitty breathed a soft, melancholy line on AM radio before Static stitched the verse in half and sent it out over the empty field. Frank Dwyer spotted the truck first from the fence line. He had been walking the boundary, checking for breaks where the year's cattle might push through. He raised a hand to shade his eyes and waited for a head to pop up from the rows for a glove to wave him over. Nothing, just the sifting hush of wind through Milo and the distant clank of a windmill pump. His own cows, heads down, worked the last of the bluestem and answered him with indifferent tails when he called, "Eli?" He didn't like the look of the whole tableau. Eli Carter was as predictable as a chore list. Truck straight, door shut, cap on the mirror like a bookmark in his day. Not this. Frank swung the fence wire down with his boot heel and crossed the ditch to the Ford. Heat from the idling engine bled an oily sweetness into the air. He stood in the door's shadow and took in the scene the way a man remembers a photograph after it's burned. Wallet on the bench seat, reading glasses folded beside it, work gloves on the passenger side like a passenger itself. The rearview mirror was naked. The John Deere cap that had hung there since the summer of '88 was gone. He leaned in and let his knuckle graze the thermos, hot enough to flinch. He looked out across the field again. "I'd sooner bleed diesel than waste it," he muttered, not realizing he was speaking aloud. "This ain't him." Frank left the truck as he found it, took 2 steps back, and jogged to the fence post where he'd left his jacket. He dug out his pocket radio, thumbed it, and told dispatch he had found an idling vehicle at the North Carter field with no sign of the driver. He kept his voice even, like he was describing a stray heifer. But as he waited for the reply, he watched the keys swing on their little metallic pendulum and felt a trick of dread in the gut, the way a man feels just before a storm breaks wrong. Sheriff Lena Morales arrived in a tan Crown Vic that threw up a skirt of dust. She was 38 and compact, with eyes that missed little and a posture that suggested she had made herself out of angles and will. Prairie County had taught her to referee, bar fights, property lines, brothers who hadn't spoken since '72, more than it had taught her to chase ghosts. She stepped out and the Polaroid camera bumped her hip where it hung on its strap. Her deputy, Boyd Haskins, came behind her with a scene kit that was really a tackle box. "Who called it?" she asked, already moving. "Me," Frank said. "Truck S. Eli S." Lena paused at the open door. The radio murmured, the dashboard clock read 9:02. She took a breath and let the details register like items on an inventory. Conway Twitty on KPRY AM. Odometer, 2-3 miles since yesterday's note in the logbook, home to field like always, wallet and glasses on the bench, work gloves on the passenger seat, missing cap. She clicked off a Polaroid. The camera spit out the wet square and she shook it twice and tucked it into the brim of her hat to develop. Another shot, the thermos and the keys with their nervous music. She tilted her head and listened to the field. The wind did its work, carrying sound away into the nothing. "I'd sooner bleed diesel than waste it," Frank said again, as if repetition would turn it into evidence. "Nothing S out of place, and that's exactly what's wrong," Lena said softly, more to herself than to him. Boyd circled wide, trying not to disturb what the ground could tell them. The ground had its own opinion. A week without rain had hardened the topsoil into something like fired clay. The Ford had rolled in clean and stopped square. No footprints, no scuff. If Eli had stepped down, the land had refused to record it. "Dispatch is already lighting up," Boyd reported, coming back with his notebook open. "Harvest calls, a combine with a hot bearing on County 6, and the Thornton boys yelling about a dog. You want me to peel away?" "No," Lena said. "We do this right." She leaned inside the cab, careful not to touch, and sniffed, coffee still strong. The thermos cap lay unscrewed in the cup holder, beads of steam tracing lazy rings. She thought about Linda Carter setting out a mug at the same hour, the 2 cups steaming in 2 different places, a routine like prayer. She thought about Eli's cap and that empty mirror and how rituals were anchors and flags both. "Tell me about the morning, Frank," she said, stepping back. "I was walking the fence, saw the Ford, called, nothing, it's wrong." Eli doesn't leave a truck running, doesn't leave a door hanging like a tongue. "You go in the field?" Not past the door, didn't touch a thing. Lena nodded. You noticed the cap missing. Frank gave a gentle chuckle that didn't land. Maybe Linda washed it yesterday. Lord knows I forget my hat enough. She took that in without comment and shot another Polaroid of the mirror. Then she lowered her gaze to the rose. If a man stepped between the Milo, the leaves would catch his jeans and whisper about him. The wind tugged at the stalks and made their whisper a general hum. Could have stepped out to check for a rock or a wire snag, Boyd offered, eyes tracking the neat lines. Left his wallet, left his glasses. Eli can't read a seed label without those things, Lena said. And he leaves notes when he's late to supper. He leaves breadcrumbs through his day. The radio at her shoulder rasped with gossip forming already. The mail clerk thought Eli had been distracted yesterday. The grain elevator said he'd been asking about insurance. She felt the county's need for the story to be simple roosting like starlings on a wire. A river accident. A stranger. Something you can fence out or learn to avoid. She took stock of her tools. 1 deputy on scene, 2 in the county already running. A state trooper who might help for an hour if a wreck didn't yank him away. No crime lab, just her camera and Boyd's care. She needed dogs. She needed a helicopter she didn't have, a miracle she wasn't owed. Get Lyon County on the line for their bloodhounds, she said. Ask for 2, ask them to bring handlers who won't mind clearing half a day. By noon, the field was ribboned with yellow tape. The sun rose to its full white burn and then softened, and the Polaroids, 20 of them now, curled in a neat stack on the hood of the Crown Vic, anchored with a wrench. Volunteers showed up with thermoses and questions. A rumor about hobos drifted through like chaff. Someone swore they'd seen a stranger at the truck stop 2 nights ago. Someone else said the river did this when it was in a mean mood. Lena listened and let it all move past her without letting it inside. The work gloves on the passenger seat stayed where they were, mute and accusing. The bloodhounds came late afternoon, tongues lolling, baying softly as if apologizing for their own presence. The handler let them nose the cuff of Eli's work jacket from Linda's mudroom and then brought them to the Ford. They pulled, eager, and traced a line along the edge of the rows, heads low. For a moment, Lena felt the first true thing tug on the leash, something you could follow out of uncertainty and into a fact. They took the trail toward the south fence, across the grazed pasture, and down the slope where Cottonwood Creek slid through cottonwoods and osage, brown and slow. The dogs lost it at water's lip, paced, circled, whined. The handler gave them time. They picked up hopeful and then lost it again. Dusk crept in. Someone turned on the Ford's headlights and they glowed uselessly against the falling dark. Lena stood at the creek's edge with Boyd, shoes sinking a half-inch into the damp. The cottonwoods flickered their last light. Somewhere up the road, a tractor backfired twice like a pair of distant gunshots. She felt the county's eyes on her already, asking for an answer she didn't have and didn't know yet how to earn. If he went in, we'd have found him, she whispered, not taking her eyes off the water. So where the hell did he go? By noon, the news had moved faster than any patrol car. The Carter farmhouse became a slow-moving intersection where sympathy and speculation met. Chevy pickups angling into the gravel lane, church ladies lifting Pyrex casseroles like offerings, men in seed caps standing in small huddles and talking in what they imagined were quiet voices. The screen door breathed open and shut, bringing in drafts of October and the smell of coffee that had gone bitter from sitting too long on low heat. Linda Carter kept setting a second cup anyway. She poured, waited for steam to lift, then didn't touch it. When it drifted cold, she poured another. She moved like a woman carrying glass, deliberate, neither hurried nor still. Sheriff Lena Morales watched her from the kitchen threshold, hat in her hands, feeling the ache of ritual bend into panic. "Mrs. Carter," Lena said softly, "walk me through his morning." Linda turned from the sink, drying her hands on a dish towel that had once been white. "He kisses the back of my head because I'm always at the sink when he leaves. He takes the thermos, checks the weather, leaves a note if he'll be late to supper. Eli leaves notes if he's late to supper. He leaves breadcrumbs through our day." Lena nodded, filed the words with the Polaroids of the Ford and the way the keys had clicked like a metronome for dread. "Did he say anything last night? Anything about a break in the fence, a tool he needed, a call he had to return?" Linda's gaze drifted to the rotary phone on the wall. A spiral-bound notebook lay under it, the first pages full of grocery lists and mended fence reminders. The last few had just dates. "Phone rang at 9:20-something," she said. "Late for us." He said hello twice, then listened and said he'd look in the morning. He hung up and didn't look at me. I didn't ask. We don't keep secrets, Sheriff, just don't always fill every quiet. Number show up. This old thing doesn't tell tales. Linda put a hand flat on the counter to steady herself. He wasn't worried, or he didn't want me to see it. The screen door sighed again. Emily, 21, with a teacher's aide's clipboard tucked under her arm, came in with a stack of index cards. If folks call with tips, I'm logging who, when, and what, she said, more to give the words shape than to inform anyone. Her eyes were red but dry. She had taught morning circle that day and then dismissed class 10 minutes later, unable to keep a story straight that ended in a missing person. Noah arrived a half hour after his sister, tires crunching up the lane. He stepped out of a tan Ford Ranger in a button-down that still carried the keystone stiffness of an engineer's office. He hugged his mother and then moved through the house with a tape measure he must have pulled from his glove box. He took the distance from the porch to the driveway in long, careful strides, then stretched the tape from the spot where Eli's boots usually sat to the hook where his keys usually hung. From the porch to the truck, 42 seconds, he said to Lena when she stepped onto the porch with him. He didn't plan anything. He moved like muscle memory. The cap should have been on the mirror before he even turned the key. Lena absorbed his certainty. The town's easy theories were already lining up. River Pull, strangers, a hobo camp 2 counties south that traveled like a traveling sin through gossip. But standing with this family, routine felt like a wall someone had cut a door into. "Ma'am," a breathless voice. The male clerk from town, a woman with a permanent ink smudge on her thumb, stood at the base of the steps. "He came by yesterday afternoon. Nearly forgot his change. He's never like that. He asked if I'd seen the farm service flyers about crop insurance changes. I told him to ask John down at the elevator." Lena thanked her and drove the 3 miles into town to the grain elevator. The manager, John Evers, met her with the smell of dust and dry corn. He folded and refolded a rag in his hands as he talked. "Eli asked about land values if he were to lease a parcel," John said. "Odd for him, he's got enough to keep him busy. I told him folks were talking about the gas survey out west kicking up prices on the right acres. He didn't say more, just, you know Eli. Quiet." On the way back, she swung into the post office and the truck stop, where the cashier swore 2 men with out-of-state plates had been eyeing wallets last night like magpies. "Big belts, big talk," the cashier said. "Could be nothing, could be something." By the time Lena stepped back outside, the rumors had picked up hitchhikers and multiplied. Back at the farm, Frank Dwyer had made himself indispensable. He'd parked his truck crossways to make a desk out of the tailgate and spread a county map over it. "We'll grid the south pasture, then push toward Cottonwood," he told a circle of men, his finger traveling the lines like a conductor. 2 to a row, keep your eyes up for clothing and don't touch. He walked plates of food into the kitchen, clapped Noah on the shoulder, told Emily that the church was organizing a prayer chain, told Linda she needed to eat. His helpfulness had its own gravity and people orbited it. Lena watched him adjust the search times with a ballpoint, moving crews toward the creek hard and early. He wasn't wrong, the creek had taken men before. But it also offered the town an excuse they preferred over the idea of a hand on a shoulder in the wrong dark. Deputy Boyd brought her a new sliver of discomfort. "South pasture gate's not chained like Eli chains it," he said, keeping his voice low. "He double wraps once through, once around. This is single with the hook turned under, and Mrs. Carter says the cattle were in the east lot this morning." Eli's rotation wouldn't have them there till Friday. Routine again bent. "Photograph the gate," Lena said. "Mark the chain, get prints if the dust will let us be lucky." As afternoon smudged toward evening, the house filled with a quieter kind of noise, the kind that happens when people are trying not to imagine. Emily had turned the dining table into a command center, index cards in neat piles, calls made, calls received, sightings to check. "Payphone clicks," she wrote on one, explaining to Lena. "When you get a call from a payphone, there's this little clatter after the hello. I swear I heard it last night. He said he'd look in the morning." "Who asks a man to look at 9:23? Noah took the county map from Frank and laid his ruler across it. "If he left the house at 8:58, drove 2-3 miles, he tapped the odometer notation from Lena's notebook. "He parked at 9:02. 42 seconds to lock the door, hang the cap, walk the first row. This distance here," he marked the mowed strip to the south fence, "is 80 yards. If someone pulled in behind him, he'd hear tires on gravel, but the wind was up. It was, Lena said, remembering how it had shredded sound into nothing earlier. She felt the press of the county's expectation on her shoulders, the familiar weight of being good with fights and drunks but being asked now for a miracle. Her radio spit updates: a combine fire contained, a fender bender near the school, 3 different people who knew for a fact the river had taken him. She wanted more deputies, a lab that could wring a footprint out of baked clay, time that would stand still long enough to let her think one thought all the way to its trained end. She chose motion. She canvassed the South Road. The Rains place sat catty-corner from the Carter pasture, a white farmhouse with a porch sag that looked like a smile too tired to hold. Mrs. Rains met her with an Afghan over her shoulders. "I didn't want to bother you," she said, "but my husband was up with his heartburn at 2 this morning. He said he saw headlights cutting across the Carter Field Road. Not down on County 6 up there by the south gate, just a minute or two, then gone. He thought it was the Thompsons hauling hay early, but the angle didn't look right." Lena wrote it down with care, printed rather than scrawled. 2:00 a.m. headlights, south gate. She looked past Mrs. Rains at the darkening line of cottonwoods and felt the hair along her arms lift as if a draft had found her. "Who was up in Eli's fields before dawn?" she said aloud, the question small and hard and heavy as a socket in her hand. They dragged Cottonwood Creek before sunrise, the water cold enough to sting through rubber hip waders. A flatbed from the highway department brought grappling hooks and aluminum boats that looked too light for the work. Volunteers lined the banks with styrofoam coffee cups steaming in their hands, waiting for the creek to give up something it didn't want to surrender. The hooks hauled up what a farm county keeps losing: a stringer of rusted wrenches, a shotgun barrel furred with silt, 2 tires, a 5-gallon bucket with a turtle sulking at the bottom. Mid-morning, Boyd called out "bone," and 3 hearts stopped before he lifted a pale rib cage that turned deer when Dr. Harkins from the clinic took one look and shook his head. No man in that water. Not today. By noon, the October sun had baked the mud to brick again. Sheriff Lena Morales stood with a clipboard and a throat full of grit, counting boats, counting hours she didn't have budget for, counting how many ways the creek could be a lie people preferred to the possibility of a hand and a rope in the dark. Her radio hissed with dispatch shifting between the drag and harvest fires and a domestic up in Scranton. In the background of everything, she kept hearing a soft chime. 9:23 p.m., the payphone clatter Linda described, the words Eli had said, "I'll look in the morning." She went hunting for that call like a splinter that wouldn't back out. Southwestern Bell required a request from the county attorney. The county attorney required a nod from the board. The board required a promise that this wasn't a fishing expedition they'd get flayed for in the Gazette. In the end, she drove to the courthouse and stood in front of 3 men with wheat dust still in the cuffs of their pants. "OT's already eating us alive, Sheriff," Chairman Belson said. "You telling me a phone bill is gonna find our man? I'm telling you, the night before he vanished, he took a collect call at 9:23. Collect means a record. A record means a place. That place is either nothing, or it's where somebody tugged on the thread that pulled him out of his life." Belson looked at her like she was asking for rain in a year that didn't have any to spare. 2 hours, he said finally. Get what you need without mortgaging the county. 2 days later, an operator in Topeka read scroll numbers that meant nothing to anyone but the telco until she translated them into a map pin. Collect call originated from a payphone at Sunset Travel Plaza, Highway 50 westbound, mile marker 182, the woman said. 9:23 p.m., October 14th. Duration 91 seconds. 30 miles west, a trucker's neon. Lena drove there after dark with Boyd and stood under buzzing lights while a teenager mopped the men's room. The payphone bank stood against a wall plastered with flyers for lost dogs and a missing hitchhiker from July. The handset cords were greasy, the instructions sun-faded to ghosts. "We don't keep tapes," the manager said, apologetic and bored at the same time. "We don't keep anything." But the place itself said enough. Someone had wanted Eli to see something in the morning, and that someone hadn't called from a kitchen table. Lena built the timeline anyway because it was all she could own. In the squad room, she taped butcher paper across a cinderblock wall and drew a neat, unforgiving line through October 14 and 15. 8:58 a.m. leaves house. 9:02 a.m. odometer 23 parks at North Field. 9:23 p.m. prior evening, collect call, Sunset Plaza. 2:00 a.m. headlights reported by Rains. She penciled in the cattle rotation anomaly, the gate chain wrapped once instead of twice, the missing cap, the coffee steam, the absence of a print on ground that should have kept at least one small secret. She added the town's theories in a margin like a list she might grocery shop from if desperation got worse. River carried him /voluntary disappearance /secret debt /stranger in a big belt at the truck stop. The board balked at real overtime for night searches. Evidence tech meant Polaroids and careful hands. Boyd dusted the south gate chain and lifted gray ghosts that were probably nothing. The powder clumped against the grit like it resented the land. Lena lined up the Polaroids across her desk and studied them until the white borders blurred. Grainy, all of them, treacherous as memory, but all she had. She drove back out to the Carter place when the light tilted softer, looking for something the day crew had missed. Frank Dwyer was there, as he always seemed to be, standing at the tailgate desk he'd made, pointing men toward the creek again. "Frank," Lena said, "walk me through exactly what you did at 9. He told it calmly, a little too practiced now, like a story a salesman tells until it stops belonging to him. Saw the truck, called Eli, touched nothing, radioed dispatch. He kept his eyes steady even when she stepped around him and opened the Ford's driver door to that same low music of keys. "You ain't curious why his cap ain't hanging where it's hung since '88, she asked, watching his face instead of the mirror, a soft chuckle. "Maybe Linda washed it yesterday. Lord knows I forget my hat enough. You double wrap your chains?" she asked, pivoting. "On the south gate. Once if I'm in a hurry." He spread his hands. "Wasn't my gate." She nodded like the exchange was a piece of twine she'd toss in a drawer and find later, either useful or a snare. "You ever make it out to Sunset Travel Plaza?" He blinked, surprised by the angle. "For diesel on the way to Dodge now and then." "Why?" 91 seconds, she said, as if that were an answer, and started walking again so he wouldn't have to show her what his face did next. The bachelor uncle floated a rumor about a note Eli had left at the bank. The bank manager said there was no note and no secret line of credit. A reporter from Topeka set up on the courthouse lawn with hairspray and a question that made it sound like Lena had chosen not to find a man as a matter of personal style. Linda came to the station once a day and stood in the doorway for a long minute as if she were speaking to a doctor about test results, then thanked Lena for doing what you can and walked out like a person balancing something on her head. The tips thinned by the second week. The men in big belts moved their thieving down the road. Cottonwood's surface smoothed over as if nothing human had ever broken it with a waiter's knee. A storm finally came and took the top quarter-inch of dust and any hope of reading tire ghosts the way she wanted. In December, when the ground locked up, Lena pulled the Travel Plaza's trash manifests for the week of the 14th, as if the name of a stranger might be printed in ink on a receipt. In January, she walked the Carter woodlot with a metal detector borrowed from the high school shop teacher and listened to it chirp at buried wire and old nails until she hated its optimism. In March, she called Southwestern Bell again to ask if some tapes had been archived after all, and the woman said sweetly that they did not archive what they did not record. "Sheriff," Belson said at the March board meeting, soft now because he had learned where her edges were, "sometimes a man wants to start over. Sometimes the river just wins." "Eli didn't buy a bus ticket," she said. "He didn't pull cash. He didn't wear his cap." She boxed the file at 6 months because you have to put things somewhere if you mean to go on. Slid Manila into Manila until the bulky truth of failure fit on a shelf between petty thefts and a grain bin accident. She kept one Polaroid back, the thermos haloed in weak light, steam visible like breath on a cold morning, and thumbtacked it above her desk lamp where she'd see it when she came in at dawn and when she turned the light off last at night. It sat there like a dare, like a promise she could not fund, like a prayer uttered to no one in particular, not forgotten. Winter taught the Carter place how to hold its breath. Snow sifted into the seams of the porch steps and crusted there, then melted into rills that drew crooked veins through the yard when March came. The coffee cup Eli had left on October 15th stayed where Linda had set it on the breakfast nook shelf, a small porcelain monument to a morning that never finished. His glasses remained folded next to the Wichita Eagle in the den, in case he walked back in and wanted to pick up the crossword where he'd left it. The lamp by his chair gathered dust you could write your name in with a finger. No one did. In the first year, neighbors came on Sundays with pies and checks for the reward fund. Emily made flyers with 2 photos, Eli squinting at a tractor manual and Eli grinning beside a grandchild, and posted them at the farm and home, the post office, the VFW. She spoke on the radio once and on a Wichita morning show twice, her voice steady and teacher-clear as she offered the tip line and said, "We miss him. We won't stop." People called to say they were praying. A few called to say they'd seen a man like him in Salina, in Hayes, in a Walmart parking lot 3 counties over, and Emily logged each report in an index card tin, every card an ember that faded when the follow-up went nowhere. Noah turned grief into tasks. He installed motion lights along the eaves and put a doorbell camera on the porch, even though the signal dropped more often than it held. He tightened hinges, replaced weather stripping, rerouted a downspout. "I can build bridges," he told Emily one night, sitting on the tailgate in the drive while their mother slept. "I can't build a past we can cross." He stared at the lane like he expected to see headlights cresting the hill. When he spoke, it sounded like he was measuring distances in his head. "From the house to the truck, 42 seconds, he said again, not to persuade anyone now, but to keep the math alive, as if numbers were candles you had to tend. Linda lived between ritual and refusal. She attended church and sat in the same pew she and Eli had warmed for 32 years, then slipped out before the last hymn to avoid the pity that made her feel like a mannequin dressed in sorrow. At Thanksgiving, she set a place for Eli and then carried the plate to the sink untouched. In May, she planted tomatoes because she had always planted tomatoes. In July, she watched the county road for dust plumes and hated herself for watching. August heat pressed the breath out of the house. September brought combines and the droning cicadas that had been the soundtrack of every fall of her adult life, and she found herself standing at the window with hands clenched on the sill, furious at the sound of harvest, as if the machines dared to move on schedule when nothing else would. Sheriff Lena Morales stayed in office 12 more years. Every time she opened a new petty theft file, she saw the edge of the Carter box on the shelf and felt the quiet accusation of cardboard. Linda visited her station once a week for the first 6 months, then every 2 weeks, then once a month. "Thank you for doing what you can," she said, and Lena wished she'd come in furious instead of polite, wished she'd demand something Helena didn't know how to make. When re-election rolled around for the 3rd time, a challenger circulated a whisper that Lena was good for bar fights and excellent for parade routes, but poor at the kind of heaviness that had haunted Prairie County since '92. She won anyway, narrowly, and learned to accept that failure could live next to competence and never stop tapping on the wall between them. There were small flare-ups over the years. A hunter found a boot in a hedgerow. It turned out to be a size 10 when Eli wore an 8. A dog dug up cloth that looked like denim and was, with a tag from a brand that went out of business in 1985. The bones beneath it were coyote. A drifter confessed to 3 unsolved murders in Kansas and Nebraska and grew so enthusiastic about his fame that the KBI quietly closed the book on him. Each time, Linda's face lit for a moment with the dreadful hope that tries to serve 2 masters at once. Find him and don't you dare find him like that. And each time the light went out. "We teach kids stories have endings," Emily told Lena in the parking lot of the grocery store, arms tucked around herself as if she were holding a child or holding herself together. "We never taught ourselves what to do when they don't." As the years deepened, the county's compassion thinned to a respectful nod. Volunteers stopped knocking with casseroles and started waving with 2 fingers lifted from steering wheels. The Gazette moved the anniversary story from the front page to be 3, then to a calendar blip between pumpkin patches and choir concerts. The reward fund sat at $12,000, then 9 when a check bounced, then 11 when a Topeka Civic Club sent a gift in honor of families waiting. The index card tin filled. Emily alphabetized by rumor, river, stranger, debt, despair. Under D she kept one card that read simply, "Dwyer too helpful." Just a question, nothing more, a note she felt guilty for keeping. Linda's body learned its own limits. The winter she turned 68, she wheezed after climbing the farmhouse stairs. The doctor in town called it a little copped and told her to mind the wood stove. The next spring she fell pulling a hose and lay in the damp grass looking up at the clear blue Kansas sky and thought, with a calm that frightened her, that lying there forever might not be the worst fate. When she stood, legs shaking, she laughed once, an ugly, solitary sound. She kept going. She was farm tough in the way that looks like grace from a distance and like denial up close. Lena retired in 2010. On her last morning, she took the Polaroid of the thermos down from the pegboard and slipped it into the inner sleeve of a black binder Bible she kept in her desk drawer, a poor man's reliquary. She told the new sheriff he had one unsolved that matters more than the rest put together, and got a nod that might have been sympathy or might have been a man eager to rearrange furniture without hearing why it had been placed where it was. She went home to a small house 3 blocks from the courthouse and planted tomatoes in a barrel and waited, in a way she would never describe to anyone, for some kind of postscript to arrive in the mail. It arrived 8 years later wearing a badge and a city's polish. On an unremarkable Tuesday in September of 2018, Sheriff Ava Ramirez, newly elected, mid-30s ex-KCPD cold case, parked a county Tahoe by the courthouse and took the back stairs down into the basement archives with a portable scanner in one hand and a cardboard box flattened under her arm. The air had that municipal tang of paper and mouse droppings and something older. Fluorescent light hummed. In the third aisle over from the water heater, a gray metal shelf bowed under 30 years of Manila. She ran a finger along the spines and found the familiar label in neat block letters, Carter, Eli, missing person, 1992. She carried the box to a metal table and opened it the way people open caskets, careful but certain. The Polaroids lay on top, a curled deck. The first image, a thermos haloed in weak light, steam a ghost barely held by emulsion. Ramirez set her scanner, fed the photo in, watched pixels resolve the way a face resolves when fog lifts. He didn't vanish, she murmured, not yet aware she was speaking. Someone took the map away. Upstairs, the board would argue cost-benefit, commissioners already marshalling objections about priorities and potholes. Down the street, 3 men at the farm and home would scoff gently about city tricks and say a computer couldn't teach a field anything it didn't want to know. At the Carter place, Emily would stand at the sink and watch dust spin in a shaft of sunlight while her mother slept in an armchair with a blanket over her knees. Noah would be measuring something on a set of plans in his office, pencil tapping rhythmically as if the beat might call past and present into alignment. Ramirez scanned the second Polaroid, the naked rearview mirror, and felt that small, clean click she lived for, the sensation of a single tooth on a gear finding its mate. She picked up the phone and dialed KCPD to request access to a software suite the county didn't have. She dialed the KBI photo lab. She dialed the clerk upstairs. "I'll need the boardroom for 20 minutes, she said without asking. "I'd like to meet the woman who took these pictures." Lena Morales arrived at the courthouse carrying her black binder Bible and the weight of 6,000 days. She stopped at the basement door when she heard the scanner whir and something like wind rose up in her, fear, hope, a weather system you feel in your bones. She smoothed her jacket and went down. "Sheriff Morales," Ramirez said, standing, hand out. "Retired," Lena said, taking it, "but I still answer to it some days." Ramirez turned the Polaroid so Lena could see the thermos again, the same ghost steam. "Ma'am," she said, as if delivering both respect and a declaration, "I think science is finally ready to listen to what you saw." Science arrived in Prairie County in a rolling case with foam-cut compartments and a laptop that looked out of place against cinderblock. Sheriff Ava Ramirez wheeled it into the boardroom and clipped a projector to a ceiling tile like she had done this argument 100 times before. "The photos are data," she told the commissioners, Linda, Emily, Noah, and at the back of the room, Lena Morales. "We can pull information out of them we couldn't in 92. We can image the ground. We can bring dogs trained to find what we couldn't admit might be there." Chairman Belson frowned into his paper cup. "Folks are harvesting. You're asking me to pay for computers to stare at old pictures." "I'm asking you to let us look properly," Ramirez said. She clicked. The thermos appeared, then the Ford's open door, then a zoom nobody could have imagined back when Polaroids were proof. A software overlay sharpened contrast. A heat map shimmered over a blown-up corner of dirt by the front tire. "That," Ramirez said, pointing, "is a second set of treads, narrower than the Ford's, not a perfect match to its path." Faint because we missed the light angle, not because it wasn't there. Belson's gaze slid to Lena, who didn't blink. She was the best we had in '92, he said defensively. She still is, Ramirez said, and she got the photos that let us do this. She moved to the next slide. Microshadows nobody but a forensic analyst would see scalloped disturbances in soil Lena had called fired clay. The human eye writes this off as wind. Pixel analysis says there's a compacted zone here, a lateral scuff here. She tapped the keyboard. It's the outline of a turn-in, not just a stop. In the front row, Linda's hand found the handle of her purse like a life ring. Emily wrote second tires in her index card letters and underlined twice. Noah leaned forward, elbows on knees, engineer's mind measuring tread width, distance, arc. Ramirez didn't let the room exhale. Step 2 is the ground itself, ground-penetrating radar. We run transects over the north field, the woodlot, and along Cottonwood. Clay soil's stingy, she said, glancing at the woman in a gray windbreaker beside her. When it gives you something after 26 years, listen. Dr. Fiona Webb nodded. Radar throws a pulse into the ground and listens for reflections. Voids, disturbed soil, buried metal, each has a signature. We're not hunting treasure, we're hunting pattern. Belson thunked his cup down. Price. Ramirez met him head-on. FBI photo lab enhancement is covered. KBI cadaver dogs are covered. GPR is on us. Day rate plus operator $2,400. A low sound went through the room, taxes made of air. Linda lifted her chin. Send me the invoice, she said. We have reward funds. Mrs. Carter, Belson started. It's my husband, Linda said. We'll spend what it costs. They went to the field at first light the way farmers do. The GPR unit looked like a stroller and hummed as doctor. Webb pushed it in straight, careful lanes. Ramirez laid a grid with survey tape, stake by stake, the geometry a kind of prayer. Atlas and Ranger, the KBI cadaver dogs, whined in their handler's truck, keyed by the smell of morning and work. Why here? A man asked from the road, a neighbor in a seed cap. Why not the creek again? Because we did the creek, Ramirez said without turning. Now we're listening to the ground. Lena walked the perimeter, hands in her jacket pockets, and watched Ava's jaw set when the county's nerves came calling. She recognized that tension, the feeling of a year's worth of political capital being spent on a single bet. They started at the Carter yard, worked out to the north field. The radar sang nothing but clay and roots. Atlas sniffed every stake and got bored, his tongue lolling like a flag in neutral. At the fence line, Dr. Webb stopped and squinted at the laptop, then shook her head. Old trash pit, she said, reading the signature. Metal, irregular, shallow. Homestead dump, Lena said. Every farm has one. They crossed the county road to the woodlot. 26 years had turned saplings to hardwood and drift into duff. The radar moved and the screen began to feather with small, neat arches. Anomalies, Dr. Webb said. Uniform at 80 centimeters, they look like, she blew out a breath. Post holes, old fence line, not relevant. The dogs went from idle to business in a step. Atlas's head snapped, nostrils flared, he pulled, paws digging. Ranger surged, low bark caught in his chest. Easy, the handler said, eyes alive now. Let em tell it, let em tell it. They converged on a patch of earth near a cottonwood root flare where the duff was thicker, the ground a shade darker. Atlas lay down hard, that controlled, freighted behavior every handler wants more than a howl. Ranger paced, circled, then folded in the same place. Mark it, Ramirez said, and her voice came out hoarse. 2 meters downslope, closer to the secondary channel, Ranger alerted again. Atlas confirmed, lay down with his muzzle pressed to dirt like prayer. 2, Dr. Webb said quietly. She tapped the GPR head across the first sight. The screen answered with an oblong hyperbola at 1.50 meters, then a second reflection beneath it. That's not post holes. What is it? Noah asked, the word pulled out of him before he could disguise need as reason. Something that interrupts soil the way nature doesn't, she said. Something with boundaries. The obstacle came the way they always do, from a place no one wanted to look. The first flagged site sat on what had been Carter land in 1992 and was now, after a tax swap in 2007, part of a consolidated tract held by Red Rock Ag Partners out of Wichita. A white pickup with their logo rolled up within the hour, and a man stepped out with a clipboard and a smile that meant he had a lawyer. You can't dig here without our consent, he said, or a warrant. It's the Carters' husband and father, Emily said, voice flat with a rage so old it had calcified. Under your oak, that your company bought at a discount from a man whose sorrow you counted as liability. The man didn't flinch. "I sympathize," he said, "but I answer to my board." "So do I," Ramirez said, "and I brought mine." Dr. Webb marked the grid, Boyd locked the scene. "Kelsey," she looked to the handler, "keep your dogs ready." "Sheriff," the Red Rock man said, "I was not joking about the warrant." Ramirez nodded. "And I'm not joking about getting one. You'd be wise to sign a consent form so your shareholders don't get to read in discovery that you delayed a homicide recovery." He hesitated, measuring public relations against policy. Behind him, two farmhands had taken off their caps without knowing they'd done it. Lena stepped forward once in a role she hadn't asked for. "Sir," she said, gentle as fence wire, "don't be the man whose paperwork stood between a family and the truth." He signed. Ramirez sagged a millimeter, then straightened. "We do this right," she told everyone and herself. "Chain of custody, grid, photos before cuts. Bag every layer." Dr. Webb rested a hand on the radar unit. "We'll take off the first 2 inches with shovels," she said. "Then trowels, then brushes." She looked out over the tape, the cottonwoods, the creek that had lied to them so politely for so long. "Clay's stingy," she said again. "When it gives you something after 26 years, listen." Dawn broke in a clear strip the next morning when they returned with shovels, trowels, and gridding tape. Deputies set cones on the road. A kettle hissed on a camp stove. The air smelled of wet leaves and the iron promise of disturbed earth. Emily and Noah stood beyond the tape, hands clenched white, as if the act of holding on could change what waited under 1.5 meters of stingy clay. They opened the ground like a book they were afraid to read. Ramirez had the grid photographed, numbered, and initialed before a single trowel scraped duff. Dr. Fiona Webb called depths in centimeters. Boyd read them back into the chain of custody log. A deputy with a Nikon stood over their shoulders, laying down scale rulers and north arrows like punctuation. Beyond the tape, a small knot of neighbors gathered and then thickened when a Topeka News van slid its mast up over the cottonwoods. The Red Rock man hovered with the tightened smile of corporate liability. Emily and Noah stood with their fingers laced in front of them, knuckles bloodless. Site 1 yielded first, because the dogs had made their plea there with such urgency Lena could still feel the echo in her ribs. 2 inches down, Webb's trowel clicked against something that wasn't stone. She uncovered the curve of a skull with a blunt muzzle and teeth worn to nubs. The collar tag was a rusted oval. The letters wanted to be read but wouldn't. A farm dog, old by the look of its bone porosity. "Atlas, you found an old soul," Kelsey, the handler, murmured, scratching the bloodhound's ear. Webb eased the skeleton free and laid it in a brown paper bag that crackled with the soft, indecent noise of artifacts you shouldn't have to bag. "Not our man," Webb said, voice precise, respectful, "but don't disregard it. It tells us this is a place for burying." Site 2 went metallic. The trowels sang when they hit it. Webb rolled her wrist and uncovered a nest of rust, parts from something once useful. Mower blades, a coil spring, a length of chain, none of it newer than the first Bush administration. Homestead dump, just like Lena had guessed the day before. The crowd's breath came out in one mass exhale that sounded like disappointment pretending to be relief. "Keep the grid intact," Ramirez said, swallowing against the copper taste of adrenaline that had nowhere to go. "We finish what we start." They took a break long enough for the kettle to hiss and pour. Ramirez carried 2 mugs to the Carters. "We're going to carry him out right," she told Emily low, as if saying it too loudly would scare the promise. "That's a promise." Emily nodded once, as if the syllable itself might strip her of balance. "Please don't talk to the cameras," she said without looking up. "Please don't let them make this a show." "Duly noted," Ramirez said. She turned and caught the news producer's eye and gave a tiny, lethal shake of her head. The mast lowered. Webb ran the radar head one more time between the 2 flagged points, then angled upslope where the cottonwood root flare lifted the earth like a shoulder. The screen answered with a low, neat hyperbola that wasn't a post hole and wasn't metal. Webb drew a breath and tapped the grid line. "Here," she said, 3 meters north of Site 1, anomaly at 140 centimeters. Shape suggests a long, continuous boundary. "Trench?" Lena asked. "Or a grave cut," Webb said, and the word hung in the air like a bell. They opened Site 3 with trowels and brushes and a patience that felt like an affront to the Carters, 26 years of waiting. At 80 centimeters, they met a texture change, a darker, looser soil like crumbs in a seam. At 1 meter, Webb showed Ramirez a fray of blue denim stained the color of the clay that had slept on it. A few more careful strokes and a bit of nylon shivered into view, pale and stiff. "Stop," Webb said, hand up. The Nikon shutter fluttered. "Photograph, scale, cast that fiber before it dries." Boyd unfolded a little cardboard tent and wrote 3C on it with a Sharpie. "Evidence 3C, fiber, nylon, possible restraint," he read into the log. At 1:30, bone. Webb eased a radius clear and set it on a foam cradle like a newborn. More brushing, more photographs, time bending in that strange way it does when you measure it in centimeters and breaths. The skeleton was disarticulated in the way years due to a body when water and roots conspire to loosen every vow the bones made to each other. At what would have been the wrists and the ankles, nylon fibers banded the bones like pale rings, webbed with clay. "This wasn't panic," Webb said, voice gone flat with that rare tone that's half science and half prayer. "This was planning." Ramirez swallowed hard, throat thickening. "You see that?" she asked Boyd, but it was a foolish question everyone saw. "Bag fibers separately, moist pack paper, no plastic. We're not growing a garden in the evidence room." "Copy," Boyd said, already labeling. 3D distal radii, 3E fibulae, 3F nylon bands. The skull was deeper, tucked between roots, as if someone had reached down into the past and palmed it. Webb brushed the cranium free and her expression changed. A starburst fracture flowered on the left parietal, the edges clean in a way that weather couldn't fake. "Blunt force," Webb said. "Large surface area, heavy tool, not a fall." Lena felt heat behind her eyes. She refused to blink into tears. Her mind lined up every farm weapon that fit. Sledge, the back of an axe, a T-post driver, a shovel thrown wrong. 3 feet from the main pit, Webb's trowel struck metal with a small, embarrassed clink. She swept and found a ring glinting dull yellow under clay. A classic men's band, cheap engraving inside. EL+LC, she lifted it like it might burn. Beside it, a watch, face cloudy but intact, and a wallet leather-soft and sealed with silt. "Separate burial," Webb said softly, as if she were talking to the kind of child who will only listen if you keep your voice shaped like gentleness. Whoever did this knew what these meant, wanted them found or wanted them not to stain the body. Symbolism, not sloppiness. Emily made a sound that wasn't a sob and wasn't a word. Noah's hand found her elbow and stayed there, a brace you could see him concentrate to hold. A murmur ran through the crowd. The Red Rock man stepped back instinctively like the dead could reach through dirt and mortgage clauses. The news van's lens crept up and Ramirez pointed and it sank again. "Back everyone up 10 feet, Ramirez said. "We're not contaminating 26 years with boot prints. Boyd, I want a second chain of custody recorder. Kelsey, water for the dogs and then take Atlas around the perimeter again. Maybe he tells us where tools went too." "Tools leave a scent?" Kelsey asked, not unkindly. "They do when somebody sweats fear on them," Ramirez said, and even Lena didn't know if she meant it as science or prayer. They worked until the light thinned and the air took on that iron-blue edge just before dark. Webb wrapped each bone in Tyvek, wrote numbers as if casting a spell. Ramirez signed every seal. When they lifted the last of the remains into a body bag, the cottonwoods gave a single long whisper that sounded, for a breath, like language. Linda arrived just as they were zipping. Emily stepped to her, both hands up. "Mama," she said, and the word broke, and Linda put her palm on the bag the way a person touches a church door. "Bring him home," she said to Ramirez, not pleading, directing. "We will," Ramirez said, "with respect." The deputies loaded the gurney into the county van. A trooper blocked the road for the slow mile to the asphalt. Lena stood with her arms crossed tight against herself and watched taillights thread away through trees that had learned the art of keeping secrets. The email came after midnight, when the house was quiet and the courthouse was colder than it had a right to be. Ramirez had posted Webb's preliminary photographs to the KBI lab with the kind of subject line that makes technicians sit up straight. The reply pinged into her inbox with the tone she'd disabled years ago and forgotten to redisable tonight. Preliminary, secondary DNA detected ON nylon fibers, sites wrist ankle, probable male contributor. Profiles run against CODIS. Hit, further report to follow. Ramirez stared at the word until it doubled. She forwarded the note to herself to fix it in the world and then to no one else. She closed the laptop and stood very still in the boardroom, where the projector hung like a sleeping eye and the thermos on the screen, frozen in a sharper focus than any of them had earned in '92, seemed to steam again. The email with the word hit sat in Ramirez's inbox like a small, lit charge. She printed it and carried it down the dark hallway to Lena's old office, now hers, the Polaroid of the thermos pinned above the desk like a patron saint. She dialed the KBI lab and listened to a tech named Baird walk fast. "Secondary DNA from the nylon ligatures," he said. "Low quantity but clean, probable male contributor. Profile matched to a 1999 felony battery case. State database rolled it into CODIS in 01. "Whose battery?" Ramirez asked, already opening a blank page and writing who in block letters so large they ate the top of the sheet. "Dwyer, Franklin E., Baird said. "Bar fight at the Eagles, pled down but the sample stayed." Ramirez didn't move for a beat. In her head, a door she kept closed out of decency and political sense clicked open and flooded the room. She pictured Frank's tailgate desk, his ballpoint tapping search grids like a conductor. She pictured his hand steadying Linda's elbow. She pictured the town using his helpfulness like a crutch. She called DA Mark Quinn. When he answered, she didn't clear her throat. "Mark, I have a rope with Eli Carter's bones and Frank Dwyer's DNA on it." Silence and then a slow, professional exhale. "You saying that to vent or to move on it?" "I'm saying we're not done building the wall, but this is a load-bearing stone," Ramirez said. "We need a search warrant for Dwyer's barn, house, and vehicles. We need his pruning shears, any cutting tools, old boots, any rope remnants, any handwritten notes, and whatever passes for his 1992 calendar." "You know who his brother-in-law is," Quinn said evenly. "I know who his victim is," she said back, "and that he didn't just kill a man, he curated grief for 26 years. Quinn's voice went flat, which with him meant serious. "Get me sworn affidavits. I want your notes, Webb's preliminary, Baird's lab email, and every line from the 92 file that makes your neck hair stand up." Ramirez pulled Lena's box off the shelf and laid the 1992 reports out like a map. The paper had yellowed at the edges, the language hadn't. Lena's interview with Frank at 9:14 a.m. on October 15 was so tidy it squeaked. "To collected," Lena had written in the margin, then struck it out, then written it again smaller. A week later, a scene note. "Frank directs searchers toward Cottonwood early and often." A month in, Frank coordinating casseroles, vigils, map grids, prayer chains, runs toward the center of every circle. Then in a late entry, a simple, unproud line. "If he did it, he's better at being good than I am at believing it." Ramirez carried the file upstairs to the boardroom again and slid the lab email across to Quinn. Lena stood in the doorway like a shade who'd finally been invited to sit. Ava ticked through the constellation. DNA on the nylon bands. Payphone at Sunset Travel Plaza at 9:23 p.m. "We've got more coming," she said. "We pulled the Southwestern Bell AMA rolls from microfilm. Don't ask me how they still existed. That same booth placed a call at 9:19 to the Dwyer farm line, 4 minutes before Eli was lured with the fence story. That's a thread you can pluck in front of a jury." Quinn's eyebrows climbed, fight starting to feel less like a rumor and more like a job. "Motive?" he asked. "3 loans in default in September 92, Ava said, sliding a printout across. A digitized ledger from Prairie State Bank that a teller had scanned for Linda's Social Security paperwork 10 years back, now gold. Foreclosure hearing set for November 12, 92. On top of that, a natural gas seismic survey under Carter land, known to Dwyer because his cousin, Wade Kepler, worked for Prairie Basin Survey. If Carter sold or leased, Dwyer's problems looked solvable. And Wade's email this morning remembered Frank asking about mineral rights and seismic trucks back then, because why wouldn't a neighbor bring you a beer and a question? She clicked to a photo on the screen. 2 pruning shears, one seized last year in an unrelated scrap theft warrant out at Dwyer's place, a rusted pair he'd tossed in a shed. One photographed at the barn last week when Ava had been out there pretending to ask about a stray calf and cataloging the walls with her eyes. Toolmark Lab says the nylon cuts on the wristbands carry microstriations consistent with bypass shears, microscopic tooth patterns, and a smear of lanolin-based blade oil. We scraped Dwyer's shears and match. That's our second nail. Quinn looked at Lena. "You ready to have been right in a way you didn't want?" "I've been ready every morning for 26 years, she said. Her voice did not wobble. It had learned better. A knock. Emily stood in the doorway with her index card tin pressed against her ribs like armor. "We heard there was movement," she said, eyes flicking to the lab email and away. "You'll tell us if," Ramirez said, and then refused to modify it. You'll know first. Emily nodded and then looked past Ava to Lena. He prayed with us, she said, and the sentence cracked like a plate. He ate at our table. Noah came in behind her, a windbreaker thrown over his work shirt. He had that taut look men get when the lever they have needed appears in front of them and they aren't sure yet if they can pull it. Tell me you're not going to blow it on a technicality, he said to Ava. It wasn't a taunt, it was fear, weaponized for usefulness. I'm going to build it like a bridge, Ramirez said. Redundancy, no single point of failure. Obstacles rose immediately because Prairie County didn't like to give up its saints. When word leaked, because word always finds a seam, half the town recoiled like they'd been slapped for their gullibility. The other half went mean, as if being fooled entitled you to blood. The Gazette editor called Ava's office and asked if she was prepared to arrest a deacon who had arranged 6 of the last 10 food drives. Red Rock's lawyer sniffed an opportunity to scold all parties about trespass on corporate lands. A county commissioner texted, "You better be right. If this goes sideways, you'll cost us grants for a decade." Ava took it like weather and kept writing. The affidavits thickened, notarized, and stapled until they read like a narrative nobody sane could ignore. She brought Quinn the warrant packets at 4:18 p.m. Judge Hamill's on rotation, Quinn said. You want him or you want to wait for Driscoll tomorrow? Hamill reads faster, Ava said. I want Dawn. They sat before Hamill in his chambers that evening. He read for 20 minutes without stopping, lips making small movements. He put his finger on the lab email and looked up at Ava. You understand what this will do to them? I do, she said. You understand what not doing it already did, Lena said beside her, voice like the low side of thunder. Hamill signed the warrants, 3 signatures that made the room feel several degrees colder. Execute early, he said. Don't let a man get to a gun he's had a lifetime to clean. Ava left and stepped into the courthouse hallway and leaned her shoulder against the cool plaster. Her phone buzzed. A text from the KBI Toolmark examiner, prelim positive. Nylon striations consistent with Dwyer's shears. Microfragments of polyethylene and blade oil composition match. Full report in the morning. She showed Lena, then Emily and Noah in the parking lot under the one light that flickered. Emily put a hand over her mouth and left it there, as if to hold in a grief that was about to change shape. Noah stared toward the south where the cottonwoods stood black against a thin, salt-white moon. Mama can't take a circus, Emily said finally. If you're going to arrest him, don't make it a show. It won't be, Ava said. We're going to be surgical. She laid out the plan with the plainness of a grocery list. 5:05 a.m., 2 KBI agents and 2 deputies to the barn. Dwyer always fed cattle at first light, a habit that had never failed him. 1 unit to the house for the wife, respectful but firm. No sirens, no jackets that said anything bigger than sheriff. Body cams on. A search team behind the perimeter with a property receipt printed in triplicate. Emily nodded. He'll go quiet, she said. He always goes quiet when he knows he's in a corner, then he gets kind. Kind is how he's kept this town, Lena said. Quinn arrived with arrest warrants warm from the printer. He handed one to Ava and one to the KBI team leader. Murder in the first, he said. Kidnapping, aggravated battery. We'll stack what we can prove and strip what we can't. Keep the jury's path clean. Linda didn't come to the briefing. Emily would tell her at dawn because the night would sit too heavy otherwise. Before they dispersed, Noah put his hand flat on the Tahoe's hood, the way Linda had rested hers on the body bag. Engineer's advice, he said to Ava. Don't overbuild the elegant parts, overbuild the parts that fail. Ava smiled without softness. That's the plan, she said. She slid into the driver's seat, the warrant on the clipboard like a compass. Dawn sat somewhere ahead of them, waiting to turn a deacon into a defendant. They rolled at 5:02 a.m., 4 units without sirens, tires whispering over frost-stiff gravel. The sky wore that thin, pewter color the plains keep just before first light. Deputies took the east fence. 2 KBI agents drifted through the shadow between the machine shed and the barn. Sheriff Ava Ramirez stepped out beside the Tahoe, the arrest warrant flat on her clipboard like something she could use to plane a rough surface smooth. Inside the barn, a light snapped on. Frank Dwyer's silhouette moved across the open bay door, habit made visible. He lifted a 50-pound sack of feed without effort and shouldered it toward the pen, the soft, eager bluster of cattle greeting him like every other morning for 30 years. Sheriff's office, Ramirez called, clear, neutral. "Frank, we need to speak with you." Frank stopped, sack balanced on his shoulder. He turned and took in the shape of the day before anyone said it aloud. Uniforms in a ring, a KBI windbreaker at the corner of his vision, Boyd's hand low at his hip but not touching his sidearm. He set the sack down carefully on a hay bale as if sudden movements could startle more than cattle. "You got a warrant," he said, and it wasn't a question. "3," Ramirez said. She held out the papers: arrest, residence, curtilage, for your arrest and for the search of your home, outbuildings, and vehicles. Linda Carter's words had been a request. This was not. Ava read him his rights. "You have the right to an attorney." Frank's mouth pulled once at the corner. "I'll need one of those," he said. "Always thought if this day ever came, He didn't finish. Handcuffs clicked. He didn't resist. He didn't ask for a jacket. The KBI took the barn's south door, deputies the house. Inside the mudroom, a calendar from a seed company hung on a nail with 3 birthdays circled in red and nothing else. On a peg, 2 hats, John Deere green, both sweat-salted, one older than the other. A pair of bypass pruning shears sat in a coffee can on a shelf, the blade stiff with brown on the hinge. Boyd tagged them, bagged them, the evidence receipt clacking from the printer like a cash register spit out of a smaller, crueler world. At the tailgate of the Tahoe, Ava handed Frank a paper cup of water. He drank and looked past her toward the east pasture where a sliver of light was unzipping the horizon. "Pretty morning," he said. "The kind a man would want to work," Ava said. "The kind a man on trial won't see for a while." They took him in through the back of the courthouse and down the hall where the smell is always coffee and floor wax. The on-call public defender met them in a navy suit that had seen fresher battles but not bigger ones. "Mr. Dwyer," he said, "I'm Ken Atwood. We'll get through this piece by piece." Frank nodded as if accepting the day's chores. In interview 2, the room with the humming fluorescent, Ava slid into the chair opposite him and set the file down without theatrics. She kept her voice even, her questions soft enough that a recording would play them clean. Atwood sat to Frank's left, legal pad ready. "Frank," Ava began, "you set a stage, warm coffee, radio low, you left his cap off the mirror, you played neighbor on every porch for 26 years. Atwood lifted a hand, just enough to mark the boundary. "My client maintains his innocence, Sheriff." "You know the drill." "I do," Ava said. She looked to Frank. "Do you?" "If you knew this land like I do," Frank said, voice level, "you'd do what the land asks of you." "The land didn't ask for a grave," Ava said. "You did." Silence. The lens in the ceiling ticked a second. Ava let the weight of the words sit, then pulled one sheet from her file. A photo, nylon fibers at a bone's thin wrist, the coarse weave turned delicate by the scale ruler. "We found nylon bands at the wrists and ankles," she said. "Your DNA was on them." Atwood angled his body toward Frank, then back to Ava. "Secondary transfer lives for Cross," he said. "You know that. He helped search. He hugged that family." "We're not a single point of failure," Ava said. Skin cells under Eli's fingernails matched Frank. Left hand deep, Eli fought. Atwood stopped writing. "Your gate between properties was installed in '87, Ava went on, almost conversational. "We've got the invoice." Eli looped chains twice as a habit. The morning he vanished, it was once through and the hook was turned under the wrong way. That's a hand that didn't know the ritual. Or did and chose to break it. Frank's eyes flicked, a small, tired movement like a man watching a far fence line for a stray. Ava tapped another page. "We'll get the full toolmark report by noon, but prelim says the ligature cuts carry microstriations consistent with bypass shears. Yours, blade oil composition, matches what we scraped from your coffee can. The nylon is polyethylene blend from a 1990s fencing rope sold at Farm and Home. The receipt we recovered from your barn ledger, all cash, $6.79, puts it in your hands the week before. Plenty of folks bought rope in 1992, Atwood said, but it lacked heat. Ava slid a photocopy of a Southwestern Bell AMA roll across the table. Payphone at Sunset Travel Plaza called the Dwyer Farm line at 9:19 p.m. On October 14th, she said. 4 minutes later, the same booth called Eli. He told Linda he'd look in the morning. "We have the booth, the grease under the handset, the flyers on the wall, the habit of men with problems they don't want to name. Wade Kepler says you asked about mineral rights and seismic trucks in September. Your bank ledger shows 3 loans in default, foreclosure hearing set for November 12th. Prairie Basin's survey lines ran in October under Carter land." She leaned back, gave him a little air. So here's the story you can correct if you feel like being a neighbor to the truth. Atwood's pencil lifted. We're done if this moves into confessional territory. It won't, Ava said. She turned to Frank, voice low. You called him. You told him a fence was down at the south pasture and you needed a hand at dawn. You let him set his coffee, left his cap off the mirror, left the radio low because you knew the sound of that emptiness would sell your lie. You moved cattle into the wrong lot so it looked like he'd been distracted. You dug the grave weeks earlier, the soil profile says so, backfilled with a looser composition that reads like a geologic confession. You hit him once, maybe twice. Dr. Webb will testify to the starburst fracture and the force required. You cut rope with the same shears we took this morning. Then you curated grief. You ran every search. You signed every casserole list. You drew the maps. You prayed with them. Frank didn't blink through the middle of it. At the end, his jaw tightened enough to show how much effort it took to keep his teeth together. He looked at Atwood, then back at Ava. You ever run a bad year? He asked. Ava didn't answer. You stand in a field and count what you have, count what you owe, count what you promised your wife and what your father left you, and the math won't cough up the same answer twice. This county eats you with a smile when that happens. Men make choices. Some of us make them in 1 hour we can't unspool. Atwood touched his sleeve, warning. Frank, don't. I'm not confessing, Frank said, eyes on Ava. I'm telling you the land makes rules. Sometimes it asks for a trade. The land didn't ask for Eli Carter, Ava said. You did. He lowered his gaze to the table. Whatever had made him larger than life in the town made him smaller in that chair. They got nothing usable from his mouth after that. No tidy sentence the jury could hang its verdict on. Ava knew better than to push past the point where a defense attorney could pluck one word and spin it. She let him sit with the weight of the paper she'd laid in front of him and stood. Lunch, Atwood asked, almost human. County turkey, Ava said. It's not punishment, it's just what we have. Outside, the town divided itself at the diner. Some men refused to look at each other. Some talked too loud about how they'd always wondered. Others talked louder about witch hunts and city cops. Emily drove her mother to Dr. Patel's office for a blood pressure check that turned into a chairside confession. Linda stared at the poster of a heart cross-section and said, He held our sorrow like a trophy, and the doctor took her hand because medicine and ministry are cousins in counties like this. The toolmark report landed at 1:14 p.m., crisp, merciless. The fingernail DNA report followed at 3:09, male contributor consistent with Dwyer, probability ratio 1 in 8. 6 billion. The affidavit stack turned into a charging packet that turned into an arraignment time. The Gazette posted a headline with the word betrayal in a font they hadn't used since a state title in '96. 3 weeks before trial, a Tuesday with a clear blue sky, Linda Carter didn't wake from her afternoon nap. Emily found her in the chair by the window, the blanket still tucked under her hands, her mouth soft in an expression that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't pain. The scene was so gentle that for a few seconds Emily thought, finally, a mercy that doesn't cut. At the small family service, she stood beside the casket and touched the varnished edge with the same palm she'd laid on the body bag and then on the thermos. In the quiet afterward in the kitchen that smelled like coffee again, she said it to Ramirez because there was no one else to say it to. She waited for truth, Emily said, looking at the place her mother's cup sat empty. Not the verdict. The case was captioned State of Kansas v. Franklin E. Dwyer, and by 8:15 the courtroom had filled to the wainscoting, farm caps in hands, church dresses pressed, a reporter from Wichita threading a cable beneath the pews. Judge Hamill presided in a manner that suggested he'd rather be invisible until the law required him to exist. 12 jurors and 2 alternates took their seats. 5 men who'd baled hay with Frank's nephews, 3 women who'd taught Sunday school with Linda, a hardware clerk, a nurse, a wind turbine tech, a retired principal. Every face carried its own private tug-of-war between what they'd believed for 26 years and what the evidence asked them to learn in a week. Doctor. Fiona Webb went first, hair pinned up, sleeves buttoned as if the facts might get messy. She told the jury what bones remember. On a monitor, she marked a neat starburst on the left parietal of a scanned skull. Blunt force trauma, she said. Large surface area, consistent with a heavy, flat tool, a sledge face, a T-post driver, the back of an axe, not a fall. Defense attorney Ken Atwood stood for cross, gentle, almost pastoral. Doctor, we're talking about remains recovered after 26 winters in clay soil. Whether roots, critters, could they mimic this pattern? They could not, Webb said, and her tone made the room feel level. Fracture morphology doesn't guess, it testifies. She moved to the nylon bands photographed at the wrist and ankle bones. Ligature artifacts, she said, cut with a bypass shear, 2 passing blades. We recovered microstriations on the cut surface and residue from a lanolin-based blade oil. Atwood tried again. You can't tell us which pair of shears cut those bands. I can tell you what cut them and what did not, Webb said. Not a knife. Not a tearing event, not time. The toolmark analyst followed, a man with steady hands and the manners of a shop teacher. He set a magnified image of a nylon cut beside a micrograph of Frank Dwyer's shears, the ridges lined like a topography you could hike. Do they match? DA Mark Quinn asked. They're consistent to the exclusion of common tools, the analyst said. Add the matching blade oil signature and the probability of coincidence narrows considerably. Atwood rose. Consistent isn't conclusive. Neither is any single raindrop, the analyst said, but you know when you're in a storm. The DNA expert came in a slate-gray suit and spoke in clean decimals. Low quantity but interpretable male DNA on the nylon ligatures, she said. Profile matched Franklin E. Dwyer through CODIS. Additional male DNA under the victim's left-hand fingernails consistent with Mr. Dwyer with a probability ratio of 1 in 8, 6 billion. Atwood stood. Secondary transfer exists. Hugs, handshakes, casseroles. This is Kansas, counselor. He helped search. He may have hugged Mrs. Carter. He may have. Secondary transfer explains trace touch, the expert said. Not DNA embedded deep in nail scrapings. That requires force, struggle. Sheriff Ava Ramirez took the stand last before lunch, a map of the Carter place and the north field projected behind her. She rebuilt the morning with a carpenter's clarity, the odometer frozen at 2-3 miles, the Ford parked at 9:02 a.m. Conway Twitty low on a.m., coffee steaming, wallet and glasses on the bench seat, the mirror naked where a cap had hung since 1988. Second tire track, Quinn prompted. Confirmed by digital enhancement of the 1992 Polaroids, Ava said. Narrower tread, angled in behind the Ford, consistent with a quiet turn in and out. Gate. Installed in 1987, she said, nodding to a faded invoice. Mr. Carter double-wrapped that chain for years. On October 15th, single wrap hook turned under wrong, consistent with a hand-breaking ritual or a staged exit. Cattle, in the east lot the morning of, she said, tapping a print of hoof patterns. Mr. Carter's rotation wouldn't have put them there till Friday, staging to sell distraction. Quinn slid a photocopy onto the overhead. Phone, Southwestern Bell AMA rolls, 9:19 p.m. October 14th, Sunset Travel Plaza payphone to the Dwyer Farm line, she said. 9:23 p.m. the same booth placed a collect call to the Carter residence. Mrs. Carter heard the payphone clatter. Mr. Carter said he'd look in the morning. That's a lure. Motive. 3 loans in default in September 1992, she said, lifting a digitized bank ledger. Foreclosure hearing scheduled November 12th. Natural gas seismic survey active under Carter land. Mr. Dwyer's cousin worked for Prairie Basin. He asked about mineral rights. Grave, pre-dug, she said. Soil profile shows looser backfill. 26 years of roots don't fake that. Atwood stood for cross and tried to fold the storm into separate drops. You have no eyewitness, Sheriff. No murder weapon. Your case is circumstantial. Most murder cases are, Ava said. Gravity's circumstantial too until you've fallen. He jabbed at chain of custody. He held up grainy Polaroids and suggested photographic pareidolia. He floated lab contamination, memory contamination, county gossip as a pollutant. He called Pastor Irwin, who said Frank stacked chairs after potlucks and once paid for a widow's propane fill without a receipt. He called a feed salesman who said Frank's handshake made you feel anchored. Quinn didn't fight the character wall, he walked around it. In redirect, he put up the separate burial, ring, wallet, watch, 3 feet from the grave. Sloppiness, he asked Webb. Symbol, she said, someone who knew what those meant. On the second afternoon, Quinn stood for closing, 2 hands on the lectern, voice unadorned. A man didn't disappear, he said. A neighbor erased him, then wrote himself into every casserole line and search party. Rope remembers, bone remembers, soil remembers where a spade went wrong. Those Polaroids Sheriff Morales took in '92, what you may have called grainy, held a second tire track for 26 years until science caught up. We're not guessing, we're listening. He ticked each proof like fence posts along a property line. Rope DNA, fingernail DNA, toolmark match, payphone link, financial collapse, pre-dug grave, staged cattle, second tire track, separate burial of keepsakes. He set the ring on the lip of the evidence tray, the cheap engraving EL plus LC dulled by clay, and let silence turn the air solid. Atwood's closing was a plea to the grain of familiarity. He asked who the jurors would be when the state came for someone they'd known since Little League. He warned about machines that could see ghosts in pixels and government that could stack inferences into a gallows. Reasonable doubt, he said, isn't a loophole, it's a guardrail. The jury went out at 10:46 a.m. They asked for the shears, then the ring, then the AMA rolls. At 2:03 p.m. the bailiff called everyone back, the pews filled without the shuffling sound a crowd usually makes. Frank sat at counsel table looking smaller than the furniture. On count 1, murder in the first degree, the foreman said, voice steady, we find the defendant guilty. Count 2, kidnapping, guilty. Count 3, aggravated battery, guilty. No one moved, no one cried out, even relief understood it owed quiet for a minute. Sentencing followed a month later. Judge Hamill took aggravators and mitigators like weights in each hand and set them down, life without parole. Then he asked if anyone wished to speak. Emily stepped to the lectern in a dark dress that fit like resolve. She looked at Frank, then at the jurors, then at the ring in a clear bag. My mother waited for truth, she said. Not the verdict. The truth is you held our sorrow like a trophy. We were your alibi. You taught this town to love its own myth about you while you let us stand in a field and ask the wind for answers. We'll bury my father now. We'll bury my mother next to him. But we're done burying the story. She turned to Ava and then to Lena, sitting behind the rail with her hands clasped. Thank you for not letting dust be the last word. On the way out, the county did what Kansas counties do when their saints fall. They made room for two thoughts at once. Some men stared at their boots. Some women hugged in the hallway and whispered prayers they'd been saving for years. Pastor Irwin put a hand on the back of a pew and stayed there long after the courtroom emptied, as if the wood could hold him up while he learned a new map of his own town. For the first time since October 1992, silence in that room felt clean. October 15, 2018, dawn came in clean and thin like the first page of a new ledger. The funeral home's coach turned off County 6 and eased down the Carter lane, tires whispering over gravel that had memorized this family's comings and goings for half a century. The field beyond the windbreak was stubble and pale gold. The cottonwoods along the creek held their breath, 26 years to the day. They had chosen the hilltop cemetery west of town, the one with a view of sections that Eli could have named by quarter and compass. By 10 o'clock, the road up was a soft procession. Pickups with feed sacks in the back, minivans with booster seats, a church bus making the climb in low gear. Hundreds came, and some of them could not meet the Carters' eyes. You could feel the town performing two simultaneous acts, mourning a good man and learning how to grieve for the myth of another. The casket was simple oak. Emily had picked it because Eli had always run toward plain, sturdy things that would earn their keep. She stood beside it with a program folded in half and softened by her grip. Noah stood on the other side, wind tugging his suit coat. Linda, in a dark wool dress and a scarf Noah had bought her in Wichita, sat between them in a folding chair, hands nested around a handkerchief she did not use. The October sun warmed the crown of her gray hair. Pastor Irwin spoke, his voice working its way across the small sound system and the big open. He read from Ecclesiastes about times to plant and times to pluck up and managed not to overwork the metaphor. He mentioned a farmer who was faithful in small things, who left notes if he was late to supper. He did not say Frank's name. He didn't have to, it was a burr in every mind anyway. When it came time for family, Noah stepped forward. He put a hand on the oak and left it there like a man testing a beam. Engineers fix what failed, he said, eyes on the grain rather than on the faces. We couldn't fix time, but we fixed the story. He looked up once toward the cottonwoods. Dad, I measured that morning 100 ways. It never added up. Today it does. You come home whole when the truth comes with you. A breeze lifted the edges of the green tent and flapped them once, the way canvas does on a harvest truck. Emily spoke next, brief and steady. Mom used to say a day isn't right until the house smells like coffee. Her mouth trembled, then set. We will make sure this story, smells like morning again. Sheriff Ava Ramirez stood off to the side with her hat in her hands, uniform jacket buttoned to the collar. She kept herself small all morning, giving the family the fullness of the stage. But when the crowd thinned for the recessional, she found Lena Morales at the edge of the tent, the older woman's posture straight as ever, eyes bright with a satisfaction that refused to be triumph. "You were right about the cap," Ava said, quiet. Lena's mouth ached into something like a smile. "I was right about the feeling," she said. "You were right about the tools." They watched the pallbearers, Noah among them, lower the casket on straps that creaked softly. Linda pressed her palm flat to the lid one last time, as she had to the body bag days earlier, as she had to the thermos in her kitchen when she thought no one was looking. When the first shovel of clay hit wood, it made the dull, honest sound that belongs only to permanences. After the graveside, people stood in little triangles by their cars and passed covered dishes from hand to hand, as if the town needed to move food the way it moves weather, by neighborly convection. Some approached the Carters and said what they could. Some kept a respectful distance and stared at their boots. A few, lost in the undertow of their own shame, slipped away without signing the guest book. On the walk back to the car, a woman with a name tag from the farm and home stopped Ava by the gate. "I don't know how to say this without it sounding wrong," she said, face working, "but thank you for seeing what we couldn't stand to look at." Ava nodded. "Thank you for standing here now." That night the county road wore its usual darkness, a long ribbon with just enough reflectors to suggest the way. Ava drove it slow and alone, window cracked to let in the cold. Headlights combed the bar ditch. The fields on either side looked empty and quiet in the way that never tells the truth. She thought of all the quiet crimes that hide in ordinary routines, the small violences that think they can borrow the camouflage of habit and never pay it back. She wasn't a romantic about justice. Kansas had taught her not to be, but she believed in tending fields. Science, memory, courage. You keep walking the rows, you pull what doesn't belong, you do it again. She turned down the Carter lane one more time, not to intrude, but because the porch light glowed and there were 3 silhouettes inside, and she needed to see with her own eyes that the house held. Inside, Emily had cleaned the thermos. She'd scrubbed its scuffed metal until a dull shine came back and set it on the kitchen shelf where Linda had kept Eli's cup like an artifact. On the stove, a fresh pot bloomed that slow, generous smell that can make grief sit down for 5 minutes and put its feet under a table. Noah, tie loosened, leaned against the counter and watched the steam curl up and vanish. Linda, tired in a way that had stopped being a phase and become a season, sat at the breakfast nook and let her shoulders drop the half-inch that people who carry are allowed at the end of a day. Ava knocked once on the doorframe and didn't step farther. "I won't stay," she said. "I wanted to return this." She held out a folded copy of the program with a Polaroid tucked inside, the thermos haloed in weak light, the one that had pinned Lena for 26 years and then led Ava to the door she could push open. "For your box," she said to Emily, "or your trash, your choice." Emily unfolded it, thumbed the photo, and smiled without brightness. "It goes in the box," she said. "We keep our maps." "Stay for coffee," Linda said. It surprised even her, the invitation. She could feel the old wound tug where it had been stitched. Still, there it was, the impulse to offer warmth because cold had had such a long run. Ava hesitated, then shook her head. "Another time," she said. "I like to leave a house when it starts smelling like morning again. Means I didn't break anything." After she left, they poured 3 cups and sat. No one said anything useful, which was exactly right. Outside, the thermometer on the porch clicked down a degree and then another. Somewhere a coyote yipped, thin and far. The house exhaled. Months later, when the verdict had become a sentence, and the sentence a routine visit from the Department of Corrections, when casseroles had returned to birthdays and flu season, and not to vigil tables, when the Gazette had turned from betrayal to school levies and wheat futures, the 3 of them drove back up to the cemetery with a second arrangement of flowers. They set them in the holder between the 2 stones. The left one bore Eli's name and the dates that mattered. The right one, newly carved, bore Linda's, the winter after. Emily smoothed the grass with her palm. Noah stood behind her with his hands in his pockets, reading his parents' names like blueprints that had at last been inked without omissions. "We're the stewards now," Emily said, not to be brave, but to be accurate. They drove home, and the thermos was on the shelf, and Emily set the kettle on. She rinsed 3 mugs and dried them with a dish towel that had once been white. When the kettle sang, she poured. Steam rose in slow curls and disappeared into a kitchen that smelled unmistakably like morning.